What is leadership? What's involved in it? What does a good leader look like? What does a bad leader look like? And what makes the difference? Today I'd like to begin a new sort of sub-study in the book of Joshua to go on a kind of a big tangent and then connect it back to Joshua in order to see what leadership is in the leadership study. This is Eric Slawick, aka the UWM Pen Guy for all my UWM friends, and this is the Bible commentary. As always, if you like what you're seeing, I would ask that you would hit like and subscribe in order to help the channel grow. And so without further ado, let's get into the word. So, there are two kinds of leadership that I can see. There's leadership by authority and leadership by character. These aren't formal names. I just kind of made them up, but I think it captures the essence of of the kinds of leadership. Leadership by authority is leadership you either inherit or you come to possess, where merely holding the office or the title grants you a position of leadership. Now, everything in our American way of thinking will obviously recoil from this idea. And in a way, rightly so. Now, is there a legitimate place for this? I hope we'll see in this study the answer is yes. But at the same time, it's not the ideal. In a previous study, had looked at monarchy, and I'll draw upon that study here. So I'll just kind of thumbnail the basics of the history of monarchy in Israel because it is kind of the prime example of leadership by authority. And the other kind of leadership is what I would call leadership by character, where the character of the leader is what grants them the leadership role. Now, leadership by authority is usually a formal title. It is a formally defined thing in a constitution, the constitution of a nation, or the founding documents of a church, etc., etc. And so we can already see a hint of maybe there are places where this is legitimate and places where it's illegitimate. I would say in the government, sneak peek or preview, I would say it's legitimate in civil government and completely illegitimate in the church. But we'll get there. So I would like to, and whereas leadership by character is going to be much more organic. It's going to develop naturally. People will simply follow someone who has been given sort of leadership qualities just because they're a good person to follow. They're a person who will lead them into success and victory, and their character makes it appropriate and profitable to follow them. So I'd like to do this study on the basis of 4 characters from the Old Testament, starting with the worst and going to the best, or at least the least corrupted. So the first of these will be King Saul. Now, if you're not familiar with the story of King Saul, again, I'll thumbnail the background here. Israel went through a time of great defeat in the book of Judges. Then God gave them the prophet Samuel to be their leader, raised up Samuel. Then they experienced victory under Samuel, but Samuel's sons were corrupted, and so were corrupt men, and so the Israelites looked to have a monarch like all the other nations. This is a catastrophic blunder. In the previous video, I went through the whole series of, or the whole sad history. I thumbnailed it and sketched it, and it ends up in the exile, the captivity, about 4 centuries later, of both divisions that the kingdom eventually split into. But here, it is focusing specifically on Israel's first king, Saul, it's worth noting that the description given of Saul is physical, because Saul is intended to represent the best that the merely human has to offer. And that is why when God picks David, he emphasizes, as Saul's replacement, he emphasizes that God does not look on the outward appearance, but he looks at the heart. And indeed, the Proverbs also emphasize beauty fades, or handsomeness fades. The physicality of a person fades. If that's what you look to pick your leader, well, they're getting the kind of leader they wanted, and that's gonna fade. The luster of that is going to wear off real fast for them. Now, a little bit of background to understand at least why the Israelites were in such desperation can be found with the ark narrative, as it's often been called, where the Israelites went into battle. They weren't winning, so they say, let's bring out the Ark of God, which God had actually commanded that they could bring out in a battle. They bring it out in a battle. They lose the battle. They lose the Ark, because they were essentially treating the Ark like a pagan relic or artifact or charm, a lucky charm. And they were thinking like the Philistines. The Israelites were celebrating. Their God was there. And the Philistines were terrified because the Israelites' God had shown up. And God was going to allow his ark to be captured so he could be set next to their false god Dagon. His presence could be set next to the supposed presence of their false god Dagon. And he repeatedly sort of forces the Dagon statue to essentially prostrate itself before the Ark of Jehovah. Until finally the Dagon statue is broken, and then he sends a plague of hemorrhoids, I believe, amongst the Philistines. So the priests are like, hey, this is a powerful god. We don't want him in our camp. Let's get him out of here. And then the ark returns to the Israelites. They're foolish enough to open it, and a bunch of them die because they're still kind of silly, irreverent little children who are thinking like pagans, and they don't know what's going on. So that's the ark narrative. That's the context. Confusion, chaos, defeat, failure. It's an understandable place to be in. But then you have Samuel leading them to victory. God thunders against the Philistines. But then, as I said, his sons were corrupt. And it's up and down and up and down and up and down. It's the essence of the age of the judges, the cycles of victory and defeat. And that's why they ask for a king, because they want stability, they want predictability, and they want, above all, victory. But Saul's only going to bring it to a limited degree. So the next topic, I would say, in this study is the fact that God doesn't like monarchy, as demonstrated by his warning the Israelites, and I'll put it up now, of exactly what their king was going to be like. Monarchy is kind of an abomination in the sight of God, because it's a mere man attempting to usurp the authority of God and create a pitiful little copy of God's own throne and kind of set himself up to be God. Now, of course, the ultimate monarch in the end times will fulfill this more than any other ever has. And it is what Paul warns about when he says that this man of sin will set himself up to be God in the temple of God. That monarchy, as we see here in this example, is fundamentally looking at the world it comes, this kind of leadership comes from the world. God can use it, as we'll hopefully detail later, but it's always going to be flawed. It's never going to be God's perfect will, as I suggested in a previous video. It's always going to be his permissive will, or what he permits to happen. Every king is ultimately going to fulfill this pattern. Every one of them. David, the best of them, even fulfills it. But Saul's going to do it kind of the worst. Or at least amongst the worst. And we're going to find out exactly why God hates monarchy so much. Even Samson, not under monarchy, we'll see is already kind of a disaster all by himself. But at least in his case, his leadership role died with him. And none of his mixed up legacy was directly transmitted to a direct successor, as would be the case with a number of kings that were like Samson in their character and their walking by faith. To be clear, just to foreshadow this, Samson is in Hebrews 11 by name, but we'll deal with that when we get to it. And so I think that will about wrap things up for today, because in the next video, I would like to get into the actual story of Saul and what kind of a catastrophe. It was an arc of failure. Started out strong, ended very weak. And I would say, therefore, the legacy of a false disciple. Until then, this is Eric Slaywick, aka the UWM Pen Guy, and this has been the Bible Commentary.